Hey guys, welcome to the channel, the new channel, Frosby's channel. I'm happy you're here to watch my first video. I want to give a little brief preface to who I am. You're probably wondering, who the heck is this dude, right? My full story is basically, I've been playing Dice Thrones since the very beginning, since it first started. Not like in a playtesting aspect, but when Dice Thrones was first going through different conventions, when it was first touring as a board game, I was one of the few people who was able to play it when it was first going showcasing in conventions. And I actually won a copy through a raffle at a convention I was at with the original 6 starting Season 1 characters, minus Treant and Ninja, who are not in the original 6 box set for Roxley. That's how I started with Dice Thrones. And me and my friends became obsessed. We became obsessed with Dice Thrones to the point that me and my buddy, we bought every character whenever they would come out. And then we would host tournaments, about 2 to 3 a year, and these would be major scale tournaments. I'm talking like 16 plus player counts. We did this just for fun. We did this all the time, and we always switched up our tournament formats and all this stuff. But recently, about 4 months ago, I discovered Dice Thrones has a competitive scene. I didn't even know this. I didn't know about the rank system. I didn't know about any of this. I do more digging. I discovered the Freehawks server, where I play a bunch of Dice Thrones online, and that's where probably most people in the Dice Thrones community know me from, is the Freehawks server. Well, aside from that, I am actively working with a local board game store in my hometown to hopefully, by January 1st, the Age of Innovation, we will have a ranked season where I'm helping the board game store owner run it as a dice roll, and hopefully, it goes good, and we are able to start having ranked events in my hometown, which I will be very happy about. Other than that, you're probably wondering, what gives you the quality to make a video breaking down the game? Am I world ranked? Am I a top tier player? The answer to all of that is no. I just like making things for fun. This is entirely for fun, and it's not even really that subjective. It's mostly broken down by what I like, but I tried to make some numbers work for me because I like crunching numbers. And so when I made this video, and you already kind of know what the video is going to be about, I'm making the best alts in Dice Thrones. When I'm making this video, I'm just making this for fun. The whole point I wanted to make this was for fun, but also I noticed I like ranking videos, but I like making ranking videos that are unique and different. And I saw that everyone just makes ranking Dice Throne character videos, and that's it. I didn't see anything else for other things about characters, just the characters. And I'm just like, well, that's lame. People should make more content about these characters, things on their boards and stuff. So that's where I came up for this idea. I wanted to find the best alt in Dice Thrones. And that was the whole point of this video, was to find the best alt in Dice Thrones. Let me break down how I did this process. First, I asked the simple question, what makes an alt good? That's why I had to ask myself, what makes an alt good? Then the next thing I asked myself was, how good is this given alt at any point in the game? And that then broke me down to the idea of an early game and a late game alt, right? Say, for example, I have a twice as wild, 6-it, samesies, and so wild in my hand. Is my alt worth spending all 4 on? So, how badly do you want to chase your alt? Isn't there a way people in the Dice Thrones community would call it? How bad do you want to chase your alt, right? And then finally, does Frosby like this alt? Honestly, this is probably the most important one, at least to me. Scoring alts. What I did was I scored every alt. I scored a start of game value for the alt. I scored an end game value for it. And then finally, I scored a what Frosby likes. And I'm going to get ready for a bunch of text, because I'm just full on breaking down how I did this video for the nerds like me who likes this kind of gibble gabble, Too long to read how I did scoring. This is still long, so TLDR probably doesn't help here. But anyways, for the start of game and end game scoring, I calculated the approximate delta value of every alt. For the start of game value, I determined a value if a player was to naturally roll an alt on the very first turn of the game. For the end game value, I determined a value based on how valuable an alt would be if played, with all stats, effects, and abilities being effectively used in a perfect board state. But the hero alting has 1 HP, and this is their last chance to play, really. After I found the values, I organized each ult into a tier list tracker where S tier was worth 5 points, A tier was worth 4 points, and B tier was worth 3 points, and so on and so forth. I did this for both start of game value and end game value. I won't lie, the way I organized this tier list was arbitrary and a little loose, but I did it my way, and this is my video, so yeah. Scoring continued. I then added up both the point values for both tier lists and then added in a third value from the Frosby tier list. And then the 3 values made a final ultimate value. The Frosby tier list is just which ults I like more than others in terms of how I play them and what you do when you play in the ult, like how much freedom do they give you, what do they feel cool to play, whatever I like when higher, really. Just think of it like this. This is the final number for the ult value. It is based on 2 subjective factors, data-based factors, being the early game ult factor and the late game ult factor, plus 1 Frosby subjective factor, equals the best ult. And don't worry, if you want to see these tier lists, perfect, I got you right here. You could feel free to pause either of these. I'm going to quickly go through this. I'm not breaking them down. I'm just showing this is the start of game value, and as you notice, some areas have more than others. I really just kind of looked at their value numbers, and I was like, if these were all grouped close together, I put them in a tier, and if I noticed a slight difference between one character and another, then I would probably just create the next tier. Again, it's kind of arbitrary, but it gets the idea. I tried to make at least the same roughly amount of characters in each one. So anyways, this is the start of game value. This is the end game value, so how more valuable these characters' ults are when it's in the end of the game. And then finally, the Frosby value. I really did make this one just straight as even as I could because, well, it was really, unlike the other two, which were based on actual numbers, this one was just based on what I liked, and I just placed them. And then once I filled up in section, then I went to the next section. So, and honestly, you could argue this is the only one that this is the only value that matters, and I could argue that, and I will argue that. This is the only one that values. Anyways, enough about me jibble-jabbling away about these tier lists and stuff. Let's just go right into it, starting with 39. The Samurai. And I'm not going to talk about the early game scores. You can see them all right there. I'm just going to go breaking down the character. This ult perfectly summarizes the Samurai. Boring. That's why it's in 39th. This ult doesn't do anything special. And without even talking about this ult, I'm just going to talk about how I think they should fix it. Simple ult fix is just add backstrike. Without backstrike, this ult just doesn't feel that. It feels weak. It just doesn't feel that great. And I mean, it kind of works for Samurai. I don't need to spend any more time on this guy. Last place, Samurai. 38th, Storm. Her ult is alright. Where it falls flat is the need for the charged effect to make it worth it. Problem is, charging her ult feels like a waste, which makes the ult worse. Storm already feels like she is playing behind, and you need to optimally be playing her charges or her lightning efficiently to get max value out of her. Putting a charge on her ult just feels like you're wasting a status effect that may never be used if you never hit your ult. And you could use that charge on an ability you know you will use multiple times. Or even you could use that lightning to be straight 2 damage out of it, which is still better than sitting on your ult all game to maybe never be used. That being said, even if you do use her charge effect, her ult is still way weaker than a lot of characters on this list. That's why she's 38th. 37th, Spider-Man. Now this one was interesting. If it wasn't for invisibility and webbed being so strong, this would be the last one on this list. This makes sense though, if you think about it, why this ult is pretty weak. Since you can get this ult after gaining a combo. So you could combo, do your first offensive roll phase, combo into your ultimate, your second offensive roll phase. Because of that, hitting this ult as a second offensive roll phase is still incredibly strong. But doing this ult by yourself on your first offensive roll phase is weak. So take that for granted. That is why Spider-Man is at 37th. Because I'm looking at these ults individually by themselves, right? If you just rolled this, like I said, if you roll this ult naturally, first roll, how strong is it? And if this was your first offensive roll phase, this ult would be kind of weak. 36, Krampus. Where Krampus falls flat is his need for good rejects when he uses his ult. Even just one is all he needs to even one good one is all he needs to maximize on the activate one reject without discarding it effect. Even then, his ult is scaled down due to his reject potential. When I added up his score, I factored in best case reject placement for his late game score, and even with that, his ult score was less than the average ult score across the board, still having him, as you can see, the late game score in the 1. He was in the bottom tier, even if he had the best case scenario for rejects on the board. So, that's why he's 36. 35, Psylocke. Honestly, not going to go too much on this one. Psylocke's ult would be decently low, but if you have a max level manifest die paired with how strong Paralyze can be, this ult is decent. Again, it's really low though. It's still 35th, but like if say you had a 1 or a 2 on your manifest die, or you didn't even use your manifest die, this is probably the lowest ult actually. So the only thing that raises this up is if you have a high manifest die. And for the sake of the scoring, I always use the best case, right? So you would have like a 6 on your manifest die and do 3 extra damage. Next up, 34, Thor. Now this one might make some people upset because Thor's a strong character. But Thor's ult is decent and is a decent source of damage with 14 straight up damage, plus with the 2 throws. What makes his ult work is a few spots, but the thing is that much damage, the 16 damage altogether, really isn't that strong compared to other characters' ults who do around the same amount of damage, but they add so much more. What makes this guy's ult work is a few spots from the throw and retrieving mechanics. A few of Thor's cards love him to be able to throw and retrieve multiple times in a turn, and this ult is a wonderful way to do that. Late game, this ult is on the weaker side of true value from other ults in the game. Also, his Bill score is low or his Frosby score is low because I honestly think Thor is a cool character, but this ult is kind of lame compared to others, so I dropped his score low because of that. Next up, Headless Horseman at 33. This ult is alright. 14 damage is a decent chunk of damage, just like what we saw over there with Thor. But what makes his ult slightly better is you can add in the fact it makes his Dreadfuls, add in the fact it makes his defense better this upcoming turn, as well as it sets up his Terrorize next turn, which is another 3 more damage on top of his 14 in the long run of things. And then you also gain a CP and a Grim Pursuit, which is a nice future value. The ult has a good long-term value, being that it sets up your defense and your following turn, but as a standalone ult value in the single turn is being used, it's not as much value due to the fact it is simply 14 damage. That's it. That is all this ult does in the turn it is used. Kind of lame. Artificer. This ult is pretty meh. It's pretty meh early game, right? After you have 2 to 3 bots in play then, it has some pretty decent strong value, but nothing crazy. Again, it's meh in the early game, being actually probably one of the worst. If you don't have a single bot, it's pretty bad. But, having some bots makes it a little better. Next up, 31. Santa. I know. Seeing Santa this low is kind of crazy, since his kit is kind of designed around getting his ult at least once a game. Let me explain. The damage and Eggnogs are pretty weak in terms of ult benefits. Eggnog is pretty garbage. Let's be honest with ourselves. Eggnog is garbage. And 10 damage for an ult is pretty weak. The ability to have a second offensive roll phase is pretty strong, for sure. But what doesn't make this beyond strong is the fact that your second offensive roll phase isn't anything guaranteed, unlike other ults in the game, where they give you all of the value right when you use it. With Santa, he kind of has a hard board to play around and he has a hard board to play around, and it's hard to get a decently good ability. And you could whiff with him, which is why Cheer exists for Santa, where it gives him rerolls. But because of that, his second offensive roll phase could lead to some meh rolls or some not so good rolls, which is why this ult isn't that high. Also, don't get me wrong. I love characters with a second offensive roll phase ult. Barbarian and Santa are some of my favorites to play, but I have to be realistic to an extent. 30, Huntress. This ult isn't that crazy, but it is a consistent ult damage. And then the ticking damage of bleeds helps as well in the long term. You do lose value from this ult if Naira is down, which is a major downside to it. And to pair off that point, this ult does give you a heal for Naira if she is down by using Naira's Bond, which is nice, right? It does make up for the fact that if you ulted with her down, you most likely will have her back the following turn. Also, Naira's Bond is always appreciated any chance you can get. So if Naira is up and you get Naira's Bond, cool. You can set up for a nice defensive phase with that Naira's Bond. But again, just like Huntress's problem really across her board, this doesn't do that much damage compared to other characters. It's actually one of the weaker ults. It's just, it's a little more just a consistent damage dealer. And Naira's Bond is a strong stats effect. Next up, 29, Jean Grey. This ult was a weird one to score. On one side, Jean Grey using this ult is beyond weak. It barely does any damage and gives little to no status effects. On the other side, Dark Phoenix can hit quite hard if she has some Flame Blast built up. Also, don't forget this bonus, and I did remember this when I was scoring, this bonus does give you the benefits of 3 of a kind as well when you ult, which is a hidden benefit to her character, but even then, I still have her at 29. 28, Ravenous. Hers is pretty simple. It has around 15 damage, plus a 2 health swing, which isn't bad. Hex can be pretty strong late game, preventing people from counter-ulting you, which can be pretty huge late game, when it might turn into a battle of ults. It's just, there's nothing crazy this one. 15 damage, 2 health swing, and Hex, which can be played around, and that's it. Like, again, kind of average. That's why she's at 28th. 27th. All right. Is Captain Marvel's ult decent? Yes. Does Bill like Captain Marvel? No, not really. Does this combination drop her decently low in this ranked list? Yes. Yes, it does. I really don't have much else to say to her. I don't like Captain Marvel, like, at all. I'll play her occasionally, but a lot of things on her just frustrate me. This ability is kind of strong, mainly giving you a Cosmic Ray, but I think you should be able to use that Cosmic Ray in the same turn you got it, personally, but whatever. I know that they can't do that, because if you had a Cosmic Ray coming into this, then you could use 2 of them in the same turn, that'd be busted. Well, you can't use 2 in the same turn. So, yeah, I'll stand by what I said. Let her use it right when she gets it. Why not? Next up, 26. Now, if you look back and forth between my Captain Marvel score and my Deadpool score, for the very observant viewers, you may have noticed something funny between those scores. Yes, for Captain Marvel, she had a better combined early game and late game score than Deadpool, but he is ranked higher than her because of a much higher Frosby score. To answer the barrage of comments that are coming, I love Deadpool, and he's probably my favorite Dice Tones character, which means he is probably ranked higher than he should be. But hey, it's my presentation and my ranking, so I can do what I want. Which is, in my opinion, the very Deadpool thing for me to do. Also, the ability to copy an opponent's positive stat effect is one of my favorite niche things to do in Dice Tones. Transference is my favorite base card for a reason. I, for some reason, love that mechanic of Dice Thrones, and Deadpool being the only character that has that on an board ability makes this ability slightly stronger than it should be on this rankings. But I love Deadpool, so who can blame me? Next up, 25, Iceman. This ult isn't the craziest, and sometimes is worse than using a glide that you have on your board. What this ult does well is it is a solid in-between action when you have little to no ice shards built up. This ult not only restarts your ice shards, giving you basically a glide, but it also does some decent damage and disruption. This is a very nice in-between glide action if you can get it in between your glides. And also the nice thing about Iceman is, honestly, you're mostly going to go for your basic attack, which means you'll be saving mods which you could then use to go for your ult on those in-between turns. So that is a nice little added feature. 24, Wolverine. This ult is pretty bad at the start of the game, if not one of the weaker ones. Late game, though, This ult can be one of the craziest things. If you have a few rages built up and a full hands of cards, you can turn that 12 damage basic into 20 plus damage easily. And this ult damage cannot be stopped, and you can keep stacking on if you have the perfect hand of cards. This can be one of the strongest finishers in Dice Thrones. Just like that, goes from one of the weakest early game to one of the strongest late game ults. Also, it's a goated free-for-all ult. I just wanted to say that. I just want to add that I won a free-for-all game with this ult by killing both of my opponents at once and winning. Just wanted to add that in. So, that's a cool thing about this ult. Next up, we have 23, the Paladin. This ult isn't crazy. It heals 5 and deals 10 damage. Where this ult gets crazy is from Blessing of Divinity, which on a normal character isn't the craziest thing. But on Paladin can be huge. I have seen Paladins come back and win after using up their Blessing of Divinity and being down 25 HP and still be able to come back after using a couple of Holy Lights and some good defensive rolls. And Paladin could come back, and I've seen him win coming back. So don't sleep on Blessing of Divinity on Paladin. Also, don't forget, late game, you can pair this ult with being able to use crits along with it late game. This ult is a pretty important part to Paladin's late game kit. Even if it isn't the strongest ult, it's still a pretty important part to how you play him. 22, Seraph. Kind of funny how Paladin and Seraph ended up next to each other. Where Paladin prefers to get his ult late game, Seraph prefers the earlier in the game the better. This is mostly due to getting early game stacks of Holy Presence, which can do consistent damage throughout the rest of the game. Late game, this ult is pretty alright. Aside from the Blessing of Divinity, which makes it slightly better. Though I will say, Seraph is not nearly as scary with the Blessing of Divinity on her, really only getting one more turn out of it, unlike Paladin, who could stage a full game comeback. Next up, 21, the Ninja. Ninja has a basic ult that doesn't do a lot in the long run. It gives you 2 delayed poisons, and a smoke screen, which is a lot on top of the simple 10 damage. But where this ult stacks above the rest is if you have the max 3 stacks of ninjutsu on top of this ult when you activate it. Meaning this ult could jump up in a scale of damage. If you manage to roll 3 6s, that 10 damage is now 19 damage out of nowhere with 2 delayed poisons and a smoke screen, and that's a pretty crazy late game ult if I don't say so myself. 20. Barbarian. Behold the simplest ult in Dice Thrones. Funny enough, this ult is the definition of mid in the rankings of ults, which is funny how this ult perfectly ranked in the middle of all other ults at number 20 out of 39. 15 damage straight up is amazing. It's one of the highest numbers you'll see for ults. I think 15 or 16 after going through these ults is the highest cutoff for damage, with most ults dealing around 12 or less. 15 damage straight up is awesome. Also, an extra turn is amazing. Now you're probably like, but just those two things makes this ult not stack up enough to the ults above it on this list, which is why it's right in the middle. Also, you're probably wondering why this ult is so much higher than Santa, since his ult, Santa's ult, and Barbarian's ult are basically the same. I have 2 reasons why Barbarian is so much higher than Santa. 1, it does way more damage than Santa. Santa does 10, Barbarian does 15. That's an extra 5 damage, which does loads in the grand scheme of Dice Thrones. Also, Barbarian's board is a lot easier to roll on and has, in my opinion, better board options based on your matchups. You can have more versatility with a Barbarian board, which makes the ult more versatile as well than Santa's. So that is why Barbarian is 20. 19, Black Widow. This ult is good early game because it lets you search for Red Room and infiltrate right after that. Or Red Room in your defense or Red Room in whatever, right? It's Red Room in something is what you're searching for. But if you can get this in one of your earlier turns, that's massive for Black Widow. Also, this ult is also good late game because it can help you increase your ult by 1 damage because it's late game. But it also gives you a 2 card draw, meaning, it gives you 2 cards, right? But when you play both those cards, you'll have Red Room at this point. So also getting those 2 cards will also give you 2 card draw on top, which is really nice. Now, this ult doesn't do a lot of damage with 11 damage and then a time bomb as well, but the setup for Black Widow is huge. This ult sets up the following turns for Widow, making it a very good utility ult. Number 18, Treant. Honestly, the more spirits, the better. That's the goal of the game with Treant, is pumping out spirits to pump up your damage and to pump up your longevity as a character in the game. The versatility of spirits let this be a good setup ability, and you also grow them into a Dryad for an instant 3 damage on top of the 10 damage. Or if you have a lack of spirits and want some utility out of it, you can grow those into 2 saplings, which isn't bad either. Also, I just wanted to include that this ult is even stronger in playing 2v2 because you get double the amount of Wellsprings going out, which is which is an extra 2 health on average increase to your team's health. So, just gonna say that. Just gonna add that. Number 17, Black Panther. This ult is fairly simple, but where it gets stronger is in the area outside of your ult. What I mean is, it is setting up your kinetic energy to burst sooner. Any chance to gain kinetic energy is always appreciated. Late game, this can do a decent chunk of damage while also setting up your kinetic burst to get hit the next turn by your opponent. Also, I won't forget to add that getting any form of ability to block damage on Black Panther is amazing, due to him having little to no blocking options. His defense is simply just hits back, nothing blocks. So gaining a Vibranium suit from this ult is just an added chef's kiss to this ult's quality. Number 16, Pyromancer. Now with this character comes the introduction of the characters I like to call Early Game Ult Enjoyers Club. He's the first member of the Early Game Ult Enjoyers Club. These characters will jump through the roof for the chance to gain ult on their first or second turn of the game because they can either gain or inflict a status effect that greatly benefits them for the rest of the game. For example, here with Pyromancer, getting both 3 fire masteries but also putting burn on your opponent is huge early game value. The value potential of both of those early puts Pyromancer as the first member of the early game ult enjoyers. Early game, this is also one of the best ults in the game. Late game, this ult is pretty weak. You most likely have a burn on them, and you have plenty of fire mastery come the end of the game. Honestly, late game, you might prefer taking her mini ult over taking your main ult due to the stun on the mini, which says something about how good her ult truly is. Now don't get me wrong, again, this ult's amazing in the early game. Just late game, yeah, not so good. Scarlet Witch. Decent damage, and you gain all of her good status effects, which help you in the early game. Late game, this ult can do even more damage if you have a couple crackles on you, dealing up to 18 damage, all while gaining extra status effects. Also, not to mention, Reality Warp is one of the best late game status effects for completely removing your opponent's chance to counter ult you. Replacing one of their dice with one of yours means your opponent, unless if they use a status effect removal to remove Reality Warp, if they can't, your opponent just cannot ult you back, which is huge in the late game. Number 14, Tactician, the next member of the early game ult enjoyer club. Getting this ult in the first couple turns greatly increases Tactician's odds of winning. This is due to putting target on your opponent early, but another major bonus is him increasing his max tactical advantage, which is something he enjoys reaching the stack limit for quite often throughout the game. So, being able to raise that stack limit early gives you a lot more wiggle room for the game in terms of how you spend your tactical advantages. Late game, this ult is pretty good too, and it is a clean way to deal damage without being stopped or having it be blocked in any way. But it's not nearly as strong as other late game ults. 13, Shadow Thief. Early game, this ult is extremely bad, if not arguably the worst ult in Dice Thrones in the early game. The only benefit this ult has in the early game is you roll a shadow because you prevent damage. But the thing is, you can also gain that exact same benefit by rolling for Shadow Dance, which needs 2 less 6s. Where this character shines, though, and why he's so high up, or how Shadow Thief is so high up on this list, is from the late game. The later the game goes, the more CP Shadow Thief will have, making his damage scale extraordinarily high. Along with that, later the game it goes, you can gain shadows, and the later the game, shadows are more valuable due to attacks being larger and do more damage as the game has gone on, making shadows therefore more valuable as well in the late game. Next up, 12th, Loki, another early game ult enjoyer member. Early game, this ult is quite strong. Gaining early bags of trick as well as illusion with 10 damage on top isn't bad. Plus, you put 3 spellbound on your opponent's strongest 3 early game abilities can really set Loki ahead of them from the get-go. On the flip, late game, it's not nearly as strong. Sure, the illusion is welcome, and spellbound is strong here as well, but the damage scale just isn't nearly as strong as other late game characters who have huge damage outputs. Plus, your illusion can't stop them if they ult, so there's that. Number 11, Cyclops. Look, another early game ult enjoyer has walked into the club. Being able to place 2 focus fire while gaining all of these status effects gives this guy an amazing setup potential to coast for the win in the early game. It should be illegal to be able to do all that on the first turn. Just saying. 2 focus fires and 3 battle plans on the first turn should be illegal. Late game, this ult nearly isn't as strong. But, the 3 battle plans to hopefully grab you into a leadership chain of cards can still make your opponent worried for this guy's ult at any point in the late game. Top 10 ults. These ults function at all points in the game. Or, these ults do one thing really well that stands them out from other ults. Mostly thinking of 2 characters when I say that last one. But yeah. Also, just want to remind you guys in the corner, remember these are objective Frosby facts. Argue all you want, but Frosby is always right. Just going to add that right here. Okay. Number 10, Monk. Early game, this ult is strong. Setting up a nice stack of early game chi and raising your chi limit. Late game, this ult is also nice, being able to use any chi you had on your board prior to rolling the ult to deal extra damage, since you can't keep it because you're gaining chi to your stack limit. So you might as well toss any chi out on you into extra damage, and that damage can't be blocked. Also, knockdown gets stronger the later in the game, where CP and cards are more valuable, so that's a little cherry on top to this ult in the late game. Number 9, Rogue. Just an all-around strong ult. Skyward is a strong status effect, and gaining not 1 but 2 is extremely good. 3 influence is amazing, and you have the chance to make your opponent completely whiff on their next turn, which is insane. Not to mention that you can dump a ton of damage into this ult as well with your ionic energy built up you have been building up. Honestly, I've looked at a lot of ults, and any character that has a natural way to add damage typically has an even 10 damage for their ult. But in the case of Rogue, she has 11 damage. We may not seem like a lot, but in the grand scheme of every ult, that one extra damage really pushes her over the edge over other ults, which you can always add to as well. Number 8, Necromancer. Let me start by saying Resurrect is strong. Resurrect is way stronger than Blessing of Divinity. Coming back with 5 health instead of 1, huge. Also, Inflicting Decrepify is strong. 10 damage, not so much, but the potential late game to deal up to 16 damage and heal 1 is crazy good. To top it all off, you can fully use all of your Skelly Boys and not feel bad about it because you don't have to roll for them afterwards. No Undead activation roll. Early game, this ult is pretty weak because if you don't have any skeletons, when you roll this, it's not good. Late game, this ult is insane. Being able to do that 16 damage and heal 1 is crazy good on the fact that you don't have to waste your skeletons to use it. Also, Resurrect is great. On top of that, I like to mention back to with what I talked about Scarlet Witch with status effects that affect rolling an ult. With Decrepify, it does exactly that. Only allowing your opponent to roll 2 dice per reroll extremely hinders them from chasing a late game ult if they don't naturally roll a ton of 6s on that first roll, which is huge if you're into like an ult off, at the end of the game. Number 7, Vampire Lord. This ult isn't the best thing to get early game, except for the ability to search your deck for a key card like Twice as Well. Where this ult becomes extremely useful is when you have built up 5 blood power and can create a massive 25 plus HP swing. Out of every character in Dice Thrones, if there's one character that has an actual strategy where the ult is built around the strategy, it's Vampire Lord. Vampire Lord will purposely dig through their deck to find more mods to then set up a big turn where they ult and do a massive hell swing. This combo play is crazy and what keeps Vampire Lord in the game. Sadly, the thing about Vampire Lord is due to this play existing, the rest of this character's board abilities play on the weaker side because of how crazy her ult swing can be. With all that being said, I'm sure you're wondering why isn't Vampire Lord top 3? At least since her ult is so powerful, right? When you can play it late game and use all the effects. It's a strong ult, if not one of the best. Well, the simple answer is, if you don't have enough blood power to do her blood power heal off her ult, it's honestly one of the weaker ults in the game. And that's simply why it's at number 7. If you don't have enough blood power when you ult, it will be a weak ult, because you're not going to be able to do that double health swing. Number 6, Gambit. Now, this all may surprise people to see it all the way up at number 6. And now let me do some explaining why that is. Gambit, when it comes down to it, does one thing and one thing well. Consistent damage at a high rate. What Gambit's ult does is supercharge that consistent damage while also dealing around 15 to 16 damage while gaining healing from your Disillusion and disrupting the enemy with Disruption. This ult doesn't seem as flashy as other ults, but it has insane damage and setup potential, all while getting the job done. Not to mention that regaining an ace card can be huge, especially late game when you are seeing more ace cards turned over. This allows Gambit to have huge potential of high damage turns on his following turn as well, instead of having to do a lower damage turn to regain some of his ace cards. Number 5, Gunslinger. Hey look, it's another early game ult enjoyer. Really solid startup ult. This can establish a strong effect of bounty on your opponent, paired with an early knockdown that gives you an early CP advantage over your opponent, with them guaranteed to lose some CP from the knockdown and you gaining 1 CP from your bounty. The ability to reroll your reloads really helps with the randomness of this character, and you have 2 reloads when you come time for your ult, then you are dealing some big damage. Also, don't forget, evasive and knockdown are also a really nice benefit on top of everything else. This is a random added bit, but Pistol Whip is a staple on this character, if not one of the best, fallback upgrades in the game, right? You'll see Gunslingers tend to use this ability, Pistol Whip, over and over. Well, Gunslinger's ult is basically a Pistol Whip on steroids, so that's why it's so high. 4, Munaf, final member of the early game ult enjoyer club. This ult early game is amazing. It sets up targeted early, which is amazing. It also hinders your opponent's next turn by putting blind and tangle on them, which is hard to manage and work around. And it's a decent chunk of damage with the 12 plus the 2 from target and making 14. And don't mention, there's also evasive, which is always hard to deal with, especially with Moon Elf's defense having the ability to dodge half. If you don't dodge half, you have evasive, and just it stacks up, making this ult better. Late game, it still is pretty good. Not as good as the early game, but it's still good because of all these status effects you're gaining, right? The evasive, inflicting blind, entangle, all these things add up and just make Moon Elf so much stronger than the average Dice Thrones ult. Number 3, we're up to number 3. Now we're in the top 3. We're hitting the big time ults. And here we have Cursed Pirate. This ult does everything. It deals decent damage. That's always great. Decent damage, 12, 13, it's pretty good. It gives Cursed Doubloons. Cursed Doubloons are very versatile, both being very useful to keep you in your pirate form, or if you're on skeleton form, you can use them offensively to deal that consistent extra damage to your opponent. Also, Powder Keg, pretty consistent 3 damage, as we all know. Top all of that off with Parlay, one of the single strongest status effects in the game. This ult would already be floating around top 10 without Parlay, but the Parlay addition carries this ult all the way to top 3. Number 2, Pale Lady. Early game, this is huge. Giving you moon shards and then flipping. A major key to winning on Pale Lady is flipping early and hitting this ult. Well, a major key to winning on Pale Lady is flipping early. That's kind of what you want to do on Pale Lady. And this ult from turn 1 sets Pale Lady up for the win by flipping early. Late game, even in wolf form, this ult is strong, dealing a ton of mean status effects and some pretty decent damage too. 13's nothing to laugh at. But what makes this ability so strong is you gain a moon shard in wolf form and also don't lose any. Because let's look at something real quick here. You gain 2 moon shards and then flip your board. So you say you had 0. Your first turn, you roll this. You had gain 2 moon shards. You flip. You gain a 3rd moon shard. And then you stay in your werewolf form. Meaning you just dealt your ult in werewolf form. And then we'll have at least 3 more turns in your werewolf form. That is insanely good value. And this ult is just really good. But it's not good enough to beat number 1. Number 1, I was going to ask before we got all this, but hope maybe you predicted this. I would have predicted this, but number 1 is Doctor Strange. This is the ult in Dice Thrones. This is the best ult in Dice Thrones. I don't even think it's close. I love this ult so much. This is my personal favorite ult. I think it's insanely high damage ult. This ult is just so good. Let me just break down this ult for you, okay? First off, you get to look at the top 5 cards of your deck, and you get to prepare 2 spells from that top 5. And then the other 3 cards, you can put them back in AoE or 1. That's already a nice, just on top of thing, really nice, right? But after you prepare those 2 spells, you then have the potential to deal over 20 plus damage on top of this by using your spells. This damage scale can even get crazier. Doctor Strange has the single highest damage turn in Dice Thrones, besides arguably with Wolverine, but Wolverine needs to have a little luck by re-rolling over and over with his healing, with his certain cards, right? He needs to roll 6s. Doctor Strange just has the single highest damage turn, and this ult is the activator for that. You need the right cards and the right spells in the right places, but if everything's aligned, this guy can do 30 plus damage easily. Like, easily. When I play Dice Thrones, and I see my opponent roll a few 6s on their opening roll, and then chase that ult, I tend to get a little scared, as we all do, right? When I see a Doctor Strange start to chase those 6s for an ult, I get terrified. Because I know how much of a punch a Doctor Strange ult can do. That even if I have 30 health left, I don't feel safe seeing a Doctor Strange with a bunch of 6s in front of him. All in all, this ult does so much. And the craziest part to all of this is you can try and shoot for this ult more than the average Dice Thrones character due to a little status effect called Deja Vu. If you start your first roll with 2 or 3 6s, you could really shoot for your ult without much risk. Because if you don't get it, Deja Vu, and try your whole roll phase again and go for something normal this time. Let's just ignore Babai existing, which right now in ranked play doesn't even exist. So, you can chase an ult and not feel scared at all with this guy, which is insane. The fact that the strongest ult in the game can be chased with no punishment, besides for Babai, is crazy to me. I'm just going to say that. So that is why Doctor Strange is number 1. Just being able to do that much damage. Also, the preparing spells, getting spells, looking at the top 5 cards. Everything on this character is just so strong. It's just so strong. Doctor Strange is number 1. Easily. All in all, what is the final point of this video? Well, first, Doctor Strange has an amazing ult. That's pretty clear. Second, Samurai's ult is garbage. Just garbage. Third, this video was made for fun, and this isn't a fully subjective list thanks to the Frosby factor. The whole point I made for this video was just to have fun ranking ults, and I love crunching silly numbers. At the end of the day, the ult is the best skill on every character's board, and being able to deal damage that your opponent cannot stop no matter what is by far the strongest ability any Dice Thrones character can do at the end of the day. So if you have the chance to ult away is what I will say. I guess the final thing I want to add is if you are able to take anything away from this video, is that certain ults are better or worse at certain points in the game, and some are just consistent throughout. Maybe knowing when maybe by watching this video, you learned when certain ults are good to go for and when are bad times to go for them, right? For example, the Shadow Thief going for his ult early would be a bad idea if you're using mods to chase it, right? Versus like going for a Shadow Thief ult late in the game is a great idea, and you want to chase that because it's a great way to do a ton of damage. That's just a quick example, but basically, maybe this video can help teach you, when you want to chase an ult, when you don't want to chase an ult. Anyways, this video was a lot of fun making. I plan on making other videos, so if you want to subscribe, if you like this video, the format, I'm planning on making other PowerPoints like this for whatever crazy ideas I come up with. Also recording my own gameplay videos, whatever, of me playing Dice Thrones and tournaments or whatever. That's it. That's everything. Thanks for watching. Frosby out.